Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we are going to tackle one of the biggest ideas in all of science, evolution. We're going to break it all down, look at how it works, and check out the proof, all in a few simple steps. So let's just dive right in.
So here's our game plan for today. First, we'll get a handle on what evolution actually is. Then, we'll see the mechanics of how it works. And after that, we're going to turn into detectives and look for three kinds of clues. Some from all over the world, some hidden inside our own bodies, and finally, the ultimate proof, which is found in our DNA.
All right, let's start with the most important question of all. What is evolution, really? At its heart, it's actually this simple. Evolution is just how life changes over really, really long periods of time. That's it. It's the greatest story of change ever told. Okay, now here is a really important point that clears up a ton of confusion. Evolution does not explain how life first started. That's a completely different question, a fascinating one, called the origin of life. Evolution kicks in after life began, explaining how it changed and branched out into all the amazing variety we see today. And this leads to a pretty mind-blowing idea. Think of all life on Earth as one gigantic, sprawling family tree. You, me, the birds outside, the trees, even mushrooms, we're all connected. We all share common ancestors if you go back far enough. Okay, so if life is always changing, the next logical question is, how? Right? What's the engine that's actually driving all this change? Well, the big answer really came into focus back in the 1800s, thanks to two naturalists, Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace. They both traveled the world, they studied nature obsessively, and they both, independently, figured out the main process behind evolution. Darwin then published this world-changing idea in his 1859 book, On the Origin of Species.
They called it natural selection, and it really just works in four basic steps. First up, you've got variation. Just look around. In any group of living things, everyone's a little different. This leads to competition, because things like food, water, and space are limited. Because of that, some are going to have a little edge when it comes to survival. The ones who are best adapted or best fit for their environment are more likely to live. And finally, you have reproduction. The survivors get to pass those helpful traits on to their kids. Now, just imagine that cycle repeating for millions of years, and you get evolution. You've probably heard this phrase before, right? It's always tied to evolution, but honestly, it can be a little confusing. What does it actually mean? And here's the key. Fittest does not mean the strongest, or the fastest, or the biggest. It means the one that fits the best in its environment. A tiny mouse that's an expert at hiding is way more fit in its world than a huge lion that can't find anything to eat. It is all about adapting. All right, so that's the theory. But how do we know it's true? Well, it is time to put on our detective hats and start looking at the evidence, starting with clues scattered all across the planet. There's a whole field of science dedicated to this. It's called biogeography, and it's basically the study of where stuff lives. By looking at the map of life, we can find some incredible clues about the past. For instance, scientists find fossils of the exact same ancient animals on the coasts of South America and Africa. Now, how is that possible? Well, it only makes sense if you know those two continents were once smashed together. And you see the same thing with living animals. When you find really unique creatures on faraway islands, it's a huge clue that they've been evolving all by themselves, in isolation for a very, very long time. And this is the classic example that Darwin himself saw. On the Galapagos Islands, he noticed that the finches were different on each island. On an island with lots of tough nuts to crack, the finches had these thick, strong beaks. But on an island with lots of insects to dig out of bark, their beaks were thin and pointy. Each one had perfectly adapted to its own little world. So, the evidence isn't just out there in the world, it's also right inside us. Let's shift gears and look at the clues we can find in anatomy, the way living things are built. Let's break down two really cool types of evidence here. On the left, we've got homologous structures. Get this, a human arm, a whale's flipper, and a bat's wing. They all look different, and they do totally different jobs, but on the inside, they're built from the exact same set of bones. That's a huge clue. They all came from a common ancestor. Then, on the right, you have the opposite, analogous structures. A bird's wing and an insect's wing both do the same job, flying, but they're built in completely different ways. This shows they evolved that ability separately. And then there are these things, which are just fascinating. They're called vestigial structures. Basically, they're leftover parts. Body parts that our ancestors needed and used, but that we don't really have a use for anymore. They're like little echoes from our evolutionary past.
So here's a little puzzle for you. Some species of snakes, if you look inside them, have these teeny, tiny little leg bones. They don't do anything. They're just there. So why?
It's because their ancient ancestors had legs and walked on land. The legs aren't useful anymore, but the little leftover bones are still there, like a fossil inside their own body, telling us about their history. Okay, one more, and this one's about us. Why do we get goosebumps? When you're cold or scared, your skin gets all bumpy. What is the point of that? Well, each one of those little bumps is a tiny muscle pulling a hair straight up. Now, for our ancient, much hairier ancestors, this was super useful. It would puff up their fur to trap a layer of air and keep them warm, or it would make them look bigger and scarier to a predator. For us, without all that fur, it doesn't do much. It's just another cool leftover. Okay, we've seen clues on the map, we've seen clues in our bodies, but the final, most powerful, most undeniable proof of all is found in the instruction book for every living thing, our DNA. You can think of DNA as the recipe or the code for building an organism, and by comparing that code between different species, we can see exactly how closely related they are. For instance, the DNA of a human and a chimpanzee is about 98% the same. That tells us we share a very recent common ancestor. We even share about 50% of our DNA with a banana, which just shows that if you go back far enough, everything is related. The family history is written right there in the code. So there you have it. The evidence from where things live, from how they're built, and from their very DNA all tells the exact same powerful story. Life changes, it adapts, it evolves. So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. If all life on Earth is really one enormous, interconnected family, what does that mean for how you see your place in the world? Thanks so much for joining me.